The phone kept lighting up on my desk while I told myself I'd call back later. I always did. His name stayed there for a few seconds, then faded into silence again. One missed call. Then another. Then weeks of the same quiet ritual. I wasn't angry. I wasn't avoiding him on purpose. I was just busy, like everyone else, telling myself there would be time. There was always time, till there wasn't. The day the phone stopped ringing, I didn't notice at first. And when I finally did, it was already too late. If I had answered just one of those calls, even for a minute, this story would never have happened. I never thought ignoring my father would become the biggest regret of my life. He never complained, never demanded anything. He called just to talk about the weather, the neighbor's new dog. The same stories he had told me 100 times before. Back then, those calls felt small, unimportant. They feel heavier than anything I've ever carried. This isn't a story about being a bad son. It's about being a distracted one. And if you've ever told yourself, I'll call later, I want you to stay with me until the end. Because sometimes silence doesn't mean everything is fine. Sometimes silence is the warning we choose not to hear. Life didn't fall apart all at once. It happened quietly, between meetings, traffic lights, unread messages, and promises I kept postponing. I told myself I was building something important, a career, stability, a future. Every morning started with alarms and deadlines, and every night ended with exhaustion. Somewhere in between, my father's calls became background noise. Not annoying enough to reject, not urgent enough to answer, just later. He always called around the same time, early evening, right when I was driving home, or staring at a screen pretending to finish work. The phone would buzz, his name would appear, and I'd sigh without meaning to. I knew what the call would be about. It's the same questions. Had I eaten? Was work going well? Is the weather cold where I lived? Things I didn't need to think about. Things that felt too small for the life I was living now. I'd let it ring out, telling myself I'd call back once I had a quiet moment. That quiet moment never came. At first, I still felt a little guilt. I'd send a short text. Busy today. We'll call tomorrow. Sometimes I even believed it. But tomorrow turned into next week into next month. And slowly, the guilt faded, replaced by comfort. Comfort in distance. Comfort in not having to explain my life to someone who lived in a different world, a slower world, a world I thought I had outgrown. My father never pushed, never asked why I didn't call back. He just kept calling, softly, patiently, as if he understood something I didn't. His voice messages were short, almost careful. Just wanted to hear your voice. Call when you're free. No pressure. No accusation. Just presence. And that made it easier to ignore. I told myself I wasn't doing anything wrong. Lots of people barely talk to their parents, right? That's what adulthood looks like. Independence. Space. I wasn't being cruel. I was just living my life. That's how I justified it. That's how I slept at night, by turning silence into something normal. But sometimes, late at night, when everything else was quiet, I'd scroll through my call history and see his name repeated, like a pattern I refused to read. I'd notice the gaps growing wider. I'd think about calling then, and decide against it. It was too late. He'd probably be asleep. Tomorrow would be better. Tomorrow always felt safer than now. What I didn't notice was how his calls began to change. Gaps between them shortened. The pauses in his voice messages grew longer. Sometimes he'd start speaking, stop, then start again, like he was choosing his words carefully, as if there was something he wanted to say but didn't know how. I noticed it once briefly, and then pushed the thought away. I didn't want responsibility. I didn't want concern. I wanted life to stay simple. The truth is, I liked being needed less. I liked not having to check in. I liked the version of myself that didn't owe explanations. And in that comfort, I slowly forgot something important. My father wasn't calling because he needed answers. He was calling because he needed connection. One evening after another missed call, I remember laughing with a friend. We were talking about how parents never stop worrying, how they don't know when to let go. Said it casually, without malice. He just doesn't understand how busy I am. The words came easily, too easily, and no one challenged them. That's the dangerous part about being wrong when the world around you agrees. Days passed, then weeks, And then something changed. The phone stopped ringing. At first, I didn't notice. Why would I? Silence had become normal. Peaceful even. I didn't have to feel guilty anymore. No calls meant no decisions. No excuses. No reminders of something I was avoiding. Told myself he had finally adjusted. Finally accepted the distance. That's what I wanted to believe. But deep down, something felt off. There was a heaviness I couldn't explain. A strange emptiness where irritation used to be. And for the first time, I wondered if the silence I wanted so badly had come at a cost I was in tea ready to pay. I didn't call him that night either. Without knowing it, I crossed a line I could never walk back from. At first, the silence felt like relief. No buzzing phone. No missed calls. No quiet guilt sitting in my chest while I pretended to be busy. I told myself this was what I wanted: space. Peace. The freedom to move through my days without being pulled back into a life I thought I'd left behind. But silence has a strange way of changing shape. Days passed and the relief slowly turned into something heavier. I'd catch myself checking my phone for no reason. Opening my call log, scrolling. His name wasn't there. Not today. Not yesterday. Not the day before. The absence felt louder than his calls ever were. I started noticing small things. The time of day he used to call would arrive, and my body would react before my mind did. A glance at the phone, a pause in my thoughts, then nothing. It's just a hollow moment that stretched longer than it should have. I'd shake it off, telling myself not to overthink it. He was probably busy or tired, or finally living his own life. That explanation should have been comforting. It wasn't. At night, the silence felt different. Louder, heavier. I'd lie in bed scrolling through meaningless videos, trying to drown out the quiet. And in that quiet, questions started forming, the kind I had spent years avoiding. Was he okay? Had something happened? Was he waiting for me to call, the way he always had? I thought about calling him more than once. My thumb would hover over his name. My heart would speed up for reasons I didn't understand, but then the same thoughts would return. What if he's asleep? What if he's busy? What if the call feels awkward now? Days had passed, then weeks. How do you call someone after choosing silence for so long? So I didn't. I convinced myself that arguments would have been easier. Anger leaves doors open. Silence closes them without warning. There were no fights between us, no harsh words, no final goodbye. Just two people drifting apart, one believing the distance was harmless, the other carrying it alone. I remembered how he used to talk slowly, carefully, like every word mattered. How he'd repeat himself sometimes just to keep the conversation going a little longer. I used to rush him, cut him off, tell him I'd call back later. I never noticed how often he said goodbye, like it might be the last time. Now there was no goodbye at all. One evening I found myself replaying his old voice messages, short, gentle, almost fragile. Messages I had ignored when they were new now felt unbearably precious. I listened to them again and again, searching for something, a warning, a sign, anything that could explain the sudden quiet. That's when fear crept in, not panic. Not yet. It's just a slow, sinking realization that silence isn't always peace. Sometimes it's absence. Sometimes it's a door closing quietly while you're looking the other way. Sometimes it's someone deciding they don't want to disturb your life anymore. For the first time, I wondered if the silence wasn't something he chose, but something that happened to him. My phone felt heavier in my hand that night. His name stared back at me, waiting. And in that moment, I realized something painful. Every day I waited made the distance feel more permanent. Every hour of silence made the courage to call feel smaller. Still, I did nothing. And that hesitation, that single choice to wait one more day, would soon become the thing I regretted the most. The realization didn't arrive all at once. It crept in quietly, disguising itself as exhaustion, as distraction, as the normal weight of daily life. But one moment cracked everything open. I was standing in line at a grocery store when my phone buzzed. Instinctively, my heart jumped, the same reflex I had trained myself to ignore. I looked down, already half expecting his name. It wasn't him, just a notification. Something meaningless. And yet my chest tightened. I put the phone away, but the feeling stayed. A strange pressure, like grief without a clear cause. That's when it hit me. I wasn't missing the arguments. I wasn't missing the routine. I was missing being seen, being heard, being important to someone in a way that didn't need explaining. I remembered how he used to look at me when I talked, even when I complained, even when I repeated myself. He listened like my words mattered, like my presence filled a space he didn't want empty. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped offering that same attention back. At home, I found myself staring at things we used to share without thinking. A mug he always used, still sitting in the same place. A jacket I never returned. Little pieces of him frozen in time, waiting for a life that no longer existed. They weren't loud. They didn't accuse me. They just existed, quietly reminding me of what I had taken for granted. That's when the truth surfaced, heavy and undeniable. What was missing wasn't love. Love had been there all along. What was missing was care in the small moments, the pauses, the follow-up questions, the simple act of staying present, instead of assuming there would always be another chance later. Realize I had treated his patience like something infinite, like a resource that could never run out. I had mistaken consistency for permanence. And now, the consistency was gone, not with anger, not with blame, but with a silence that felt final. I thought about all the times I had said, "We'll talk later." All the times I chose convenience over connection. I had believed that relationships only ended with dramatic explosions. I was wrong. Some end with quiet neglect, stretched out over months, disguised as normal life. That night, I finally said his name out loud, not into the phone, not to another person, just into the empty room. It sounded unfamiliar, distant, like a memory instead of a presence. Fear settled in fully then, not the fear of conflict, not the fear of rejection, but the fear that I might have realized the truth too late, that whatever he had been holding on to had already slipped through his fingers while I was busy, convincing myself everything was fine. I picked up my phone again. This time my hand didn't hesitate. I opened the message screen. The cursor blinked, waiting for words I wasn't sure I deserved to send. For the first time since the silence began, I wasn't asking whether I should reach out. I was asking whether he was still there to hear me. The message sat unsent for a long time. The blinking cursor felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. Words came and disappeared, typed and erased, each one sounding either too weak or too late. I finally sent something simple, not dramatic, not defensive, just honest. I don't know when we stopped talking, but I know I should have noticed sooner. The reply didn't come immediately. Minutes passed, then an hour. The silence returned, thicker than before. I told myself this was fair, that if he chose not to respond, I had already lost the right to complain. When my phone finally vibrated, my hands were shaking. His message wasn't long. It didn't explain everything. It didn't accuse me of anything. Somehow that made it hurt more. "I waited," it said. "Longer than I should have." Those 4 words carried every unanswered question. Every night he'd gone to sleep feeling alone while lying next to me. I could see it clearly now, how his silence hadn't been distance, but exhaustion. How he hadn't stopped caring suddenly. He had slowly given up when he realized I wasn't listening anymore. I wanted to apologize for everything at once. For every moment I dismissed his feelings. Every time I assumed love would survive on memory alone. But apologies don't rewind time. They don't restore patience once it's been drained completely. We spoke that night, not to fix things, not to argue, just to finally say the truths we had both been avoiding. There were pauses where neither of us spoke, and oddly, those pauses felt more honest than any conversation we'd had in years. He told me he didn't leave because he stopped loving me. He left because loving me had started to hurt. That sentence settled deep inside me. It wasn't anger I heard in his voice. It was relief. Relief that he no longer had to beg to be noticed. Relief that the silence had finally ended, even if it came with goodbye. When the call ended, I sat alone in the dark, phone resting on my chest, feeling something strange and irreversible. Clarity. Not the kind that brings peace immediately, but the kind that changes you forever. I understood now that love doesn't disappear in one moment. It fades when it's consistently ignored. And once it's gone, wanting it back doesn't guarantee it will return. I didn't cry right away. I just sat there, breathing, letting the weight of my own choices settle. The truth wasn't cruel, it was precise, and it left no room for denial. Some endings don't come with shouting or slam doors. Some end with understanding, and that, somehow, hurts the most. As I put my phone down, the quiet in the room felt different. Not empty, but full of understanding. The echoes of our past arguments, the nights we ignored each other, the love we took for granted, they were all there, and yet they didn't weigh as heavily anymore. I realized that some lessons can only hit when silence forces you to listen. Life doesn't always give us second chances, but it gives us clarity. And sometimes clarity hurts more than anger, more than regret, because it shows you exactly what you lost and why. I closed my eyes, letting that truth sink in, knowing I couldn't change the past, but I could learn from it. If this story touched you, made you reflect on love's silence and the choices we make, I want you to pause for a moment and think about the people in your life, the ones you take for granted, the ones whose hearts you might be overlooking. Before you leave, hit that subscribe button. Join our community of viewers who connect over real emotions, real stories, and real lessons. Turn on notifications so you never miss a story that might change the way you see your own life. And if you feel this story deserves to be shared, leave a comment, or share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes stories are more than entertainment, they're reminders to pay attention before it's too late.